Lisa and her young daughter, Lily, sat patiently in their seats on the delayed flight, trying to find ways to pass the time. Lisa had pulled out a colorful book, hoping it would keep Lily entertained. Around them, the cabin was filled with the restless murmurs of passengers, their collective impatience barely masked by the low hum of the air conditioning. Lisa stole a glance at her watch, feeling a familiar surge of frustration. They had been stuck on the tarmac for nearly an hour with no word from the flight crew. If you are not subscribed, I recommend you subscribe and activate the bell so you don't miss any videos. "Mommy, why haven't we taken off yet?" Lily asked, her innocent blue eyes wide with curiosity. "I don't know, sweetheart," Lisa said, forcing a reassuring smile. "Sometimes these things just take a little longer." Suddenly, the cabin door creaked open, and an elderly man entered, making his way slowly down the aisle. His steps were labored, and he dragged one leg behind him, each step a visible struggle. He was burdened by a heavy carry-on bag, and the effort it took him to carry it was etched on his weary face. Some passengers threw him sympathetic looks, but not the man sitting near the front. Dressed in an impeccably tailored suit, he exuded an air of disdain. As the elderly man passed, his carry-on bag inadvertently brushed against the suited man's arm. The wealthy passenger looked up sharply, his eyes filled with contempt. "Watch where you're going," he snapped, his voice dripping with scorn. "Do you even know what you're doing?" Startled, the elderly man mumbled an apology and continued his slow journey to his seat by the window at the back of the plane. Struggling with his bag, he attempted to lift it into the overhead compartment. His weakened state caused the bag to slip from his grasp, falling and striking the wealthy passenger below. The man sprang up from his seat, his face contorted with rage. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he shouted, his voice booming through the cabin. "Are you trying to kill someone with that bag?" The elderly man stammered another apology, his hands shaking. "I'm so sorry, sir. It was an accident." "An accident?" the wealthy man sneered, his voice growing louder. "Why do they even allow people like you on planes? You're a danger to everyone around you." The tension in the cabin was palpable as the elderly man stood there, his eyes filled with helplessness. The other passengers watched, some in shock, others in silent disapproval of the wealthy man's harsh words. Lisa held Lily close, trying to shield her from the unfolding scene, her heart aching for the elderly man. Lisa felt a surge of heat flush through her cheeks as the man's heartless words echoed in her ears. Her gaze swept across the cabin, noting the unease etched on the faces of other passengers, yet not a single voice rose in protest. She inhaled deeply, striving to maintain her composure for Lily's sake, but the anger simmered within her, threatening to erupt. Her eyes fixated on the elderly gentleman, his hands trembling as he struggled to stow his bag in the overhead compartment, while the wealthy man continued his disdainful sneers, offering no assistance whatsoever. Lisa's heart wrenched with empathy for the old man, and she knew she could not remain silent. Just as she was about to rise and confront the bully, the intercom crackled to life with the flight attendant's announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats and fasten your seatbelts. We are about to take off." With a resigned sigh, Lisa sat back down, her eyes flickering toward the wealthy man, silently pleading for a shred of decency during the flight. The plane began to taxi, and soon it lifted into the sky. As the seatbelt sign turned off, she allowed herself a momentary sigh of relief, hoping the journey would be uneventful. However, her hopes were swiftly dashed when the wealthy man began shifting in his seat, his exaggerated movements and loud mutterings impossible to ignore. He jabbed at the call button and then proclaimed loudly for all to hear, "I need to move. I can't sit here. The smell from that old man is making me nauseous." The flight attendant approached with a composed yet firm expression. "Sir, please lower your voice. What seems to be the problem?" The problem, the wealthy man sneered, pointing at the elderly gentleman, is him. I can't sit next to someone who reeks like a hospital. It's repulsive. Lisa's fury ignited. She could no longer keep quiet. Rising from her seat, her voice was steady and resolute. That's enough. This man deserves respect, not your insults. The wealthy man glared at her, annoyance twisting his features. And who do you think you are? This is none of your business. It becomes everyone's business when someone is treated unjustly, Lisa responded, her gaze unwavering. This man is a veteran who has served our country. He deserves our respect and gratitude, not your contempt. A hush fell over the cabin as passengers turned to witness the confrontation. Lisa's voice grew stronger. My daughter and I will give up our seats so this gentleman can be comfortable. He deserves better than to sit next to someone like you. She turned to Lily, who watched the scene with wide eyes. Lily, we're going to let this gentleman have our seats. You'll sit on my lap, okay? Lily nodded solemnly. Okay, Mommy. The wealthy man spluttered, you can't just. But before he could finish, several other passengers voiced their support for Lisa. She's right, one man declared. Show some respect, another woman added. You should be ashamed of yourself. The flight attendant stepped in, her tone authoritative. Sir, please lower your voice and show respect for your fellow passengers. Mom, if you and your daughter would like to switch seats, we'll assist you. Lisa nodded, helping Lily gather her things. The elderly man looked at her with eyes brimming with gratitude and surprise. Thank you, miss. You didn't have to do this. Lisa smiled warmly. It's the least we can do. You deserve to travel comfortably. With the flight attendant's help, the elderly man moved to the seats next to Lisa and Lily. Lily settled on Lisa's lap, and the elderly man took her seat, visibly more at ease. The wealthy man huffed but remained silent, casting one last glare at Lisa before turning away. Lisa and Lily carefully navigated the narrow aisle, moving to the seats at the back. The elderly man followed slowly, his steps still shaky, but now infused with a sense of relief. The flight attendant adjusted their seating arrangements, ensuring everyone was comfortable. Lisa gently lifted Lily onto her lap, securing her with the seatbelt. Are you okay, sweetie? She asked, brushing a stray lock of hair from Lily's face. Lily nodded, her eyes wide with curiosity. Mommy, who's that man? Lisa glanced at the elderly man, now settling into the seat beside them. He's a very special person, Lily. You'll understand soon. The man, finally settled, leaned back and sighed deeply, the relief evident on his face. Thank you again, he said softly, his voice filled with gratitude. I didn't expect such kindness. Lisa's smile was warm and reassuring. It's no trouble at all. We're happy to help. I'm Lisa, and this is my daughter, Lily. The man returned her smile. I'm Richard. It's a pleasure to meet you both. As the plane continued its journey through the sky, Lisa's eyes were drawn to the military hat Richard had placed on his lap. The hat's worn insignia hinted at a lifetime of service and sacrifice. Intrigued, Lisa's gaze wandered to the edge of a photo album peeking out from his carry-on bag. That's an interesting hat, Lisa remarked, nodding toward it. Were you in the military? Richard looked down at the hat, a gentle smile forming on his lips. Yes, I served for many years. It feels like a lifetime ago. Lily, ever curious, leaned in closer. Did you fight in wars? Richard nodded, his eyes distant as if recalling long-buried memories. Yes, I did. I was in World War II and the Korean War. Lisa's eyes widened. That's incredible. Thank you for your service. Richard waved a hand modestly. I did what I had to do, just like so many others. We all did our part. Lily, always full of questions, looked at Richard with wide eyes. Did you get hurt? Richard paused, then nodded slowly. Yes, I did. I got this limp from a bullet wound. There are still some pieces of shrapnel in my leg. Lisa and Lily listened intently as Richard began to share his memories. I remember one particular battle in Korea, Richard said. We were ambushed and chaos erupted all around us. My best friend Jack and I fought side by side, trying to make our way out. What happened to Jack? Lily asked, her voice small. Richard sighed, his eyes clouding with sorrow. Jack didn't make it. He saved my life by pulling me out of the line of fire, but he was hit. I carry his memory with me every day. Lisa reached out, touching Richard's arm gently. I'm so sorry. That must have been incredibly hard. Richard nodded. It was. War leaves scars, not just on the body but on the heart. I've lost many friends, and those memories never fade. What was it like? Lisa asked softly. Being in the middle of it all. Richard took a deep breath. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. You never knew if you'd make it to the next day, but we had each other, and that made it bearable. We were like brothers. The plane hit a bit of turbulence, and Lily clung to Lisa, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and excitement. Richard reached over, patting her hand gently. It's okay, little one. Just a little bump in the road. Lily smiled up at him, reassured. Thank you, Mr. Richard. Richard's eyes softened at her words. You're very welcome, Lily. As the plane stabilized, the flight attendant came by to check on them. Lisa took the opportunity to express her gratitude. Thank you for helping us switch seats. It means a lot. The flight attendant smiled warmly. I'm glad we could make things more comfortable for everyone. Is there anything else you need? Lisa shook her head. We're fine, thank you. As the flight continued, Lisa found herself deeply moved by Richard's stories and his humility. She felt a connection to him, a sense of shared humanity that transcended generations. There was something about his presence that was both calming and inspiring. Lily, ever curious, pointed to Richard's carry-on bag. Mr. Richard, what's that? She asked, her eyes wide with curiosity. Lisa gently admonished her. Lily, it's not polite to ask about other people's things. Richard smiled kindly. It's all right, Lisa. She's just curious. He reached into his bag and pulled out a well-worn photo album. This is a collection of memories from my time in the military. Lily's eyes sparkled. Can we see? Richard nodded. Of course, I'd be happy to share it with you both. Lisa and Lily leaned in closer as Richard opened the album, revealing pages filled with black and white photographs. Each image seemed to carry a story, a moment frozen in time. Richard's hands, though slightly trembling, turned the pages with care. This is from my time in World War II, Richard began, pointing to a photo of a group of young soldiers. We were just kids, really, full of hope and bravery, not knowing what awaited us. Lisa leaned in, her curiosity piqued. Who are they? She asked, genuinely interested. Richard smiled, though his eyes reflected a deep sorrow. These were my comrades. We went through hell and back together. That's John, he said, pointing to a tall, strong-looking man standing beside him in the photo. He was my best friend. As he spoke, Lisa noticed a shift in his tone. There was a reverence when he mentioned John, a sense of profound respect and loss. She could see the emotional weight these photos carried for him. John saved my life more times than I can count, Richard continued. There was one time in Korea when things were especially bad. We were caught in an ambush, bullets flying everywhere. John pulled me out of the line of fire, but he didn't make it. Lisa felt a lump in her throat. "I'm so sorry, Richard." Richard nodded, his gaze distant. "War leaves scars, not just on the body, but on the heart. I still have shrapnel in my leg from that day, but the real pain is losing friends like John." Lily, who had been quietly listening, reached out and touched Richard's arm. "Did it hurt a lot, Mr. Richard?" Richard smiled gently at her concern. "Yes, Lily, it did. But we did it because we believed in protecting our country and each other." As Richard turned another page, Lisa spotted a specific photo that caught her attention. It was a picture of Richard and John, both smiling broadly despite the backdrop of war. There was something familiar about John's face, something that tugged at the edge of her memory. "Who took this photo?" Lisa asked, pointing to the image. "One of our fellow soldiers," Richard replied. "It was taken just a few days before that ambush. We were so happy then, thinking we might actually make it home." Lisa's heart raced as she looked closer at the photo. The more she stared at John's face, the more she felt an eerie familiarity. She had seen that face before in her family's old photo albums. Trying to steady her voice, Lisa asked, "Richard, do you have any other photos of John?" Richard nodded and flipped through a few more pages. Each image showed different moments of camaraderie and struggle, but all with the same faces. Finally, he paused at a photo that seemed to hold particular significance. "This is John and me on the day we graduated from basic training," Richard said, his voice tinged with pride and nostalgia. "We were so full of hope and determination." Lisa's eyes widened as she looked at the photo. John's face was unmistakably familiar. "Richard, I think I know John," she said, her voice trembling. "I believe he was my grandfather." Richard's eyes widened in shock. "Your grandfather?" "I can't believe it. John never mentioned having a family." Tears welled up in Lisa's eyes as she realized the connection. He never got the chance. "My grandmother was pregnant with my mother when he went off to war. He never came back, and she raised my mother on her own." Richard's eyes filled with tears as he reached out and took Lisa's hand. "I can't believe this. John was my best friend, and now I'm meeting his granddaughter. It's like a piece of him has come back to me." Lisa smiled through her tears. "It's an honor to meet you, Richard. Thank you for everything you've done, for your service, and for being there for my grandfather." The plane continued its steady journey, but for Lisa, Lily, and Richard, the flight had transformed into an emotional reunion, bridging generations and connecting hearts in a profound way. "This one was taken right before the ambush," Richard said, his voice filled with a mix of pride and sadness. "John and I had a feeling something was coming, but we wanted to keep our spirits high." Lisa's hands trembled slightly as she took a closer look at the photo. The man standing beside Richard bore an uncanny resemblance to her grandfather, a likeness too strong to be mere coincidence. "Richard," she began, her voice quivering, "I think John might be my grandfather." Richard's eyes widened in shock. "Your grandfather?" Lisa nodded, tears beginning to pool in her eyes. "I remember seeing photos of him when I was a child. My mother always told me stories about how he saved lives during the war but never came back." Richard's expression softened, a blend of surprise and sorrow. "If John was your grandfather, then I owe him my life. He was the bravest man I ever knew." The realization hit Lisa with full force. Her grandfather, the man she had heard so many stories about, was the same John who had saved Richard's life. She felt a flood of emotion, shock, admiration, and a deep, profound gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you for sharing this with me. I never knew the full story." Richard reached out and took her hand. "Thank you for listening and for letting me remember. Your grandfather was a hero, and it's an honor to have known him." Lily, sensing the gravity of the moment, snuggled closer to her mother. "Mommy, is Mr. Richard talking about Grandpa?" Lisa nodded, her voice choked with emotion. "Yes, Lily. Mr. Richard knew your great-grandpa. He was very brave." The rest of the flight seemed to pass in a blur. Lisa and Richard continued to talk, sharing memories and stories. As the plane began its descent, Lisa's mind raced with thoughts about what she had discovered. She felt a deep connection to Richard, and she knew there was something she needed to do. Once the plane landed and the passengers began to disembark, Lisa turned to Richard. "Mr. Richard," she began, her voice slightly trembling with anticipation, "I have a favor to ask. Would you join Lily and me for a short trip? There's someone I'd like you to meet." Richard looked at her curiously. "A trip? Where to?" Lisa smiled, trying to ease his uncertainty. "It's not far, just a short drive from here. I think it'll be worth your time." Richard hesitated, glancing at his watch. "I don't want to impose." "You won't be imposing at all," Lisa assured him. "In fact, I think you'll be very glad you came." After a moment's consideration, Richard nodded. "All right then, I trust you, Lisa." They gathered their belongings and made their way through the terminal. Lisa felt a mix of nerves and excitement. She hadn't planned for this, but it felt like the right thing to do. As they reached the parking lot, she led Richard to her car, helping him settle into the passenger seat while Lily climbed into the back. The drive through the suburban area was quiet at first, the hum of the car engine providing a calming backdrop. Richard looked out the window, taking in the scenery with a hint of curiosity. "Where are we headed?" he asked. "You'll see," Lisa replied with a knowing smile, exchanging a glance with Lily, who giggled softly. After a short drive, they arrived at a quaint old house nestled in a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood. The house exuded a nostalgic charm, with its well-tended garden and a welcoming front porch. Richard's curiosity grew as they approached the front door. "This is where I grew up," Lisa explained. "My father still lives here." She led Richard inside, where the warm, familiar scent of home greeted them. They walked through the cozy living room, adorned with family photos and mementos. In the kitchen, Lisa's father Michael was preparing tea. He looked up and smiled warmly at their arrival. "Hi, Dad," Lisa greeted him, giving him a hug. "This is Richard. Richard, this is my father Michael." Michael extended his hand. "Nice to meet you, Richard." Richard shook his hand, nodding politely. "Nice to meet you too, Michael." Before anyone could say more, an elderly man entered the room. He moved slowly but with a dignified presence, his eyes lighting up when he saw Richard. John Richard's voice was a whisper, filled with disbelief. "Richard," the elderly man, John, echoed, his eyes widening. The room fell silent as the two men stared at each other, their minds racing to comprehend the impossible. Slowly, Richard moved forward, his eyes never leaving John's face. "I can't believe it," Richard said, his voice breaking. "After all these years, I thought you were gone." John smiled, though his eyes were misty with tears. "I thought the same about you, old friend. It's been a long time." Lisa watched, her heart swelling with emotion, as the two men embraced, their reunion a poignant testament to the enduring bonds of friendship and the indomitable human spirit. Lily clung to her mother, sensing the significance of the moment, her young mind absorbing the depth of the history and emotions unfolding before her. As the initial shock wore off, the two men began to share stories and memories, filling the room with laughter and tears. Lisa sat quietly, absorbing every word, feeling grateful for the chance encounter that had brought Richard into their lives. Hours passed as they talked, the sun setting outside, casting a warm glow through the windows. Finally, Richard turned to Lisa, his eyes shining with gratitude. "Thank you, Lisa. This is more than I could have ever hoped for." Lisa smiled, her own eyes moist with tears. "Thank you, Richard, for everything." As they said their goodbyes, Richard promised to stay in touch, a promise that Lisa knew he would keep. As he walked away, she felt a profound sense of peace, knowing that her family's history had come full circle, bridging the past and the present in a way she had never imagined. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Then, with a cry of joy, the two men moved towards each other and embraced, tears streaming down their faces as they held each other tightly, overwhelmed by the emotion of the unexpected reunion. I thought you were gone," Richard said, his voice breaking with emotion. John pulled back slightly, looking at his old friend with teary eyes. "I was, for a while, but I made it back. And now here we are." Lisa watched, her heart swelling with happiness and relief. This was the moment she had hoped for, the reason she had brought Richard here. She glanced at Lily, who was watching the scene with wide eyes, understanding the significance of the moment. Richard and John sat down, still holding each other's hands as they began to reminisce about their past. "Do you remember that time in Normandy?" John asked, a smile breaking through his tears. Richard laughed, nodding. "How could I forget? We were so scared, but we made it through." "And Korea," John added, his voice growing somber. "You saved my life more times than I can count." Richard shook his head. "It was you who saved me, John. I wouldn't be here if it weren't for you." The two men continued to share stories, their bond as strong as ever despite the years that had passed. Lisa and Michael quietly set out tea and snacks, giving the old friend space to reconnect. Lily sat close to her mother, listening intently to the tales of bravery and friendship. Michael joined the conversation, adding his own memories of John and stories passed down from Lisa's grandfather. "You were always a part of our family," Richard Michael said, "even if we didn't know it until now." Richard looked around at the faces surrounding him, filled with warmth and welcome. "I'm honored to be here," he said softly. "Thank you for bringing me." As the evening wore on, the conversation flowed easily. They laughed and cried, sharing a sense of camaraderie that only deepened with each story. Lisa felt a profound sense of fulfillment. She had not only discovered a piece of her family's history, but also helped reunite two old friends. As the night deepened, John and Richard continued to share their stories, the bond between them growing stronger with each word. John leaned back, a soft smile playing on his lips. "You know, Richard, I never got to tell you how I survived that day in Korea." Richard's eyes widened. "I always wondered. I saw you get hit, and then nothing. I thought you were gone." John nodded, his expression somber. "It was close. After I pulled you out of the line of fire, I got hit. Everything went black. When I woke up, I was in a field hospital. I owe my life to a nurse who wouldn't give up on me. Her name was Margaret." Richard listened intently, his curiosity piqued. "Margaret." John's smile widened. "Yes, Margaret. She was relentless, kept pushing the doctors to save me. We spent a lot of time together during my recovery and, well, we fell in love. She's my wife now. We've been together ever since." Richard's face lit up with joy. "That's incredible, John. I'm so happy for you. You found love in the midst of all that chaos." John nodded, his eyes reflecting a mix of gratitude and happiness. "Yes, she's been my rock. We've had a good life together. I never thought I'd find happiness like this after the war." Lisa, who had been listening quietly, felt a deep sense of admiration for John and his story. "It's amazing how love can find us in the most unexpected places," she said softly. John nodded. "It truly is. In the darkest times, we find the light that guides us to something beautiful. Meeting Margaret changed my life. We built a life together that I never thought possible." Richard, his eyes glistening, looked at his old friend with renewed respect. "I'm glad you found each other, John. It gives me hope, knowing that even after all we went through, happiness was still possible." The room fell silent for a moment, each person lost in their own thoughts and emotions. Then Richard spoke again, his voice filled with determination. "John, I think it's time we visit the memorial, pay our respects to those we lost and honor their memories together." John nodded, his eyes solemn. "I agree. It's time." Lisa and Michael exchanged a glance, knowing how important this visit would be for both men. "We'll go with you," Lisa said, "to support you and honor their memories too." The next day, the group made their way to the war memorial. The morning was crisp, and the air was filled with a sense of solemn reverence. As they approached the memorial, Richard and John walked side by side, their heads held high, ready to face the memories of the past. They stood in front of the memorial, reading the names etched into the stone. Each name represented a life, a story, a sacrifice. Richard and John took a moment to salute their fallen comrades, their eyes filled with tears and respect. "We'll never forget you," John whispered. "Your bravery, your sacrifice. You live on in our hearts." Richard placed a hand on John's shoulder. "They'll always be with us in every step we take. We honor them by living our lives to the fullest, just as they would have wanted." Lisa and Lily stood a few steps back, giving the men their space but feeling the weight of the moment. Michael joined them, his eyes also misty with emotion. As they left the memorial, the group felt a renewed sense of peace and closure. Richard and John had not only reconnected with each other but also with the memories of their past, finding comfort in their shared experiences and the support of new friends. Back at the house, they continued to share stories, laughter, and tears, building new memories together. The bonds formed that day would last a lifetime, a testament to the enduring power of friendship, love, and the human spirit. And so, as the sun set on that unforgettable day, they knew that despite the scars of the past, the future held the promise of healing, hope, and the unbreakable ties that bind us all. Richard nodded in agreement. "It's stories like yours that give me hope. After the war, I struggled to find my place. I wandered for a while, trying to make sense of everything. Eventually, I found a job, settled down, but there was always something missing. I guess I needed closure." John reached out and clasped Richard's hand. The conversation flowed easily, laughter mingling with tears as they reminisced about their past. They shared stories of the friends they had lost and the moments of joy and sorrow they had experienced together. As the night wore on, the atmosphere grew more reflective. John looked at Richard, his voice filled with emotion. "You know, I spent years thinking you had died. It was one of the hardest things to live with." Richard nodded, his eyes moist. "I know. I saw you get shot, and I thought that was it. Losing you was like losing a part of myself. But now, seeing you here, it feels like fate brought us back together." Lisa watched the two men, her heart swelling with gratitude. She felt a profound sense of fulfillment, knowing she had played a part in reuniting them. "Maybe it was fate," Richard said quietly. "Maybe it was meant to be that I met Lisa and came here. It's like a chapter in our lives that needed to be closed." John smiled, his eyes twinkling. "I believe that, and now that we're together again, let's make the most of it." As the evening drew to a close, Lisa and Michael prepared a guest room for Richard. "Why don't you stay with us for a while?" Richard Michael suggested. "You and John have a lot of catching up to do." Richard hesitated, then nodded. "I'd like that. Thank you." The next morning, the house was filled with the warm scent of breakfast. John and Richard sat at the table, continuing their conversation as if no time had passed. The days that followed were filled with shared meals, long walks, and deep conversations. They laughed over old memories and created new ones, cherishing each moment. One evening, as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset, John turned to Richard. "You know, Richard, we should take a trip together, visit some of the places we fought, pay our respects." Richard's eyes lit up with excitement. "I'd love that. It would be a journey worth taking." Lisa and Michael, overhearing their conversation, came out to join them. "That sounds like a wonderful idea," Lisa said. "You both deserve it." Michael nodded in agreement. "We'll help you plan it. It'll be a trip to remember." John and Richard smiled at each other, their hearts filled with anticipation. "Let's do it," John said, "for old time's sake." Over the next week, they began planning their trip, poring over maps and discussing the places they wanted to visit. Lisa and Michael helped with the logistics, ensuring everything was arranged for their journey. As Richard prepared to leave for his own home to pack for the trip, he hugged Lisa and Michael warmly. "Thank you for everything. This has been more than I could have ever hoped for." Lisa smiled, her eyes shining with tears. "It's been our pleasure, Richard. You're part of our family now." Lily, holding onto Richard's hand, looked up at him with wide eyes. "Will you come back and visit us, Mr. Richard?" Richard knelt down to her level, his smile gentle. "Of course, Lily. I'll be back before you know it, and I'll have lots of stories to tell you." As Richard and John embarked on their journey, Lisa and Michael watched them drive away, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. They had not only reunited two old friends, but had also forged new connections that would last a lifetime. The journey was unexpected, filled with moments of surprise and revelation, but it was also deeply meaningful, a reminder of the importance of connection, memory, and respect. Several weeks later, Lisa stood on the porch, looking down the road expectantly. She had been eagerly awaiting this day. Lily was beside her, bouncing with excitement. "Do you think they had fun?" Mommy Lily asked, her eyes wide with anticipation. "I'm sure they did," sweetheart Lisa replied, her heart full of warmth. A familiar car appeared in the distance, and Lily's excitement grew. As it pulled into the driveway, she couldn't contain herself any longer and ran down to greet it. The car doors opened, and Richard and John stepped out, looking rejuvenated. Their faces, once marked with years of worry and regret, now shone with joy and vitality. "Grandpa." "Mr." Richard, Lily cried, her voice ringing with happiness. John scooped her up in a big hug. "Hello, darling. We've missed you." Richard smiled warmly at the sight of Lily's enthusiasm. "Hi there, Lily. We've got so many stories to tell you." Lisa approached, her own heart swelling with emotion. "Welcome home," she said, hugging both men. "You look wonderful." "We feel wonderful," John replied, his eyes sparkling. "It was an incredible trip." That evening, as they gathered around the dinner table, the atmosphere was filled with laughter and storytelling. Lisa had prepared a hearty meal, and the aroma filled the cozy kitchen. The sense of family was strong. "So tell us everything," Lisa said, eager to hear about their journey. John and Richard exchanged a look, smiling. "Well," Richard began, "we visited Normandy first. Standing on those beaches again was indescribable. We remembered our comrades, honored their memories. It was deeply moving." John nodded in agreement. It was a powerful experience. We also visited some old battle sites in Korea. It was emotional, but it brought a sense of peace. Lisa listened intently, feeling a profound sense of admiration for these two men who had been through so much. "I'm so glad you had this experience. It's something you'll cherish forever." Richard reached across the table, taking Lisa's hand. "Thank you for bringing us together. Without you, none of this would have been possible." Lisa squeezed his hand, her eyes brimming with tears. "It was my honor. Your family now." As the evening drew to a close, they sat together, basking in the warmth of their reunion. The bonds forged through shared experiences and newfound connections would endure, reminding them all of the power of love, friendship, and the importance of honoring the past while embracing the future. John nodded, a reflective look in his eyes. "We also went to Korea, revisiting old battlefields. But it wasn't just about the places, it was about the people we met along the way, fellow veterans, their families. It was a shared journey of healing." Richard's eyes twinkled with mischief. "And we had some fun too. Remember that night in Paris, John?" John chuckled, the memory bringing a smile to his face. "How could I forget? We ended up in a little cafe, sharing stories with locals until the early hours. It felt like we were young again." Lily's eyes were wide with fascination. "Did you bring back any souvenirs?" John nodded and reached into his bag, pulling out a small hand-carved wooden box. "This is for you, Lily. We found it in a market in Seoul. It's a traditional Korean music box." Lily opened it carefully, and a delicate tune filled the room. Her face lit up with delight. "Thank you, Grandpa." "Thank you, Mr. Richard." Richard smiled, watching Lily's joy. "You're very welcome, Lily. We thought of you often during our travels." As dinner continued, the stories flowed easily, each one bringing more laughter and memories. It was clear that the trip had been transformative for both men. They seemed lighter, as if a great weight had been lifted from their shoulders. Towards the end of the meal, Lisa cleared her throat, looking at Richard with a thoughtful expression. "Richard, we've been talking and we'd like to ask you something." Richard raised an eyebrow, curious. "What's that, Lisa?" Lisa glanced at John, who nodded in encouragement. "We'd like you to stay with us permanently. John needs someone close, someone who understands him, and we'd love to have you as part of our family." Richard's eyes widened in surprise. "Are you sure? I wouldn't want to impose." "You wouldn't be imposing at all," John interjected, his voice firm. "We've spent so many years apart, thinking the other was gone. Now that we're together again, I don't want to waste another moment." Lisa nodded in agreement. "You've become a part of our lives, Richard. It would mean the world to us if you stayed." Richard looked around the table, seeing the hopeful faces of John, Lisa, and little Lily. His heart swelled with emotion. "I'd be honored," he said softly. "Thank you. Thank you all." Lily clapped her hands, delighted by the news. "Yay, Mr. Richard is staying." That night, as they settled into the living room, Richard felt a deep sense of belonging. He was surrounded by people who cared for him, people who understood the weight of his past and shared in the joy of his present. John raised a glass, his voice filled with emotion. "To family, old and new, and to the memories we've made and the ones we'll continue to create together." Together, they all raised their glasses, the clinking sound a symbol of unity and hope. Richard looked around, feeling a profound sense of peace. He had found his place, not just in a home, but in the hearts of those who had welcomed him so warmly. The journey that had begun with an unexpected flight had led him to a new beginning, one filled with love, laughter, and the promise of many more stories to come. As the evening drew to a close, Lisa watched the two old friends share a quiet conversation, their faces glowing with contentment. She felt grateful for the unexpected journey that had brought them all together. In the quiet of the night, surrounded by the warmth of family, Richard knew that he was finally home. Days turned into weeks, and the household adapted to Richard's presence. He and John often took long walks, reminiscing about their shared past and talking about the future. They visited local veteran groups, sharing their stories and offering support to others who had experienced similar traumas. The bond between them grew even stronger, fortified by the understanding that comes from shared experiences. One sunny afternoon, as Richard and John sat on the porch, Richard turned to John with a thoughtful expression. "You know, John, I've been thinking a lot about our trip and what it meant. We should write it all down, our stories, our experiences. It could help others understand what we went through and maybe even help them heal." John nodded slowly, considering the idea. "I think you're right, Richard. Our stories could make a difference. Let's do it." Lisa, overhearing their conversation, smiled. "I think that's a wonderful idea. You both have so much to share, and it would be a way to honor the memories of your comrades." Richard and John spent the next few months writing their memoirs, reliving their past through words. The process was cathartic, bringing closure and a sense of purpose. They laughed and cried as they remembered, their friendship deepening with each story they told. When they finished, Lisa helped them find a publisher who was eager to share their powerful narrative with the world. The book, titled Brothers in Arms: A Journey of War and Healing, became a source of inspiration for many. It told of their bravery, their losses, and the unbreakable bond that had seen them through the darkest times. At the book's launch, surrounded by friends, family, and fellow veterans, Richard and John felt a deep sense of accomplishment. They had turned their pain into something beautiful, something that could help others. The applause and accolades were gratifying, but the true reward was the knowledge that their stories were out there, touching lives and offering hope. As they stood together, signing books and greeting readers, Richard turned to John, his eyes shining with gratitude. "We've come a long way, old friend. Thank you for everything." John smiled, clasping Richard's hand. "Thank you, Richard, for your friendship, your courage, and for being my brother in every sense of the word." Lisa watched them, her heart full. She had played a part in reuniting these two remarkable men, and in doing so, had found a deeper connection to her own past. She knew that their journey was far from over, and she looked forward to the new stories they would create together. In the end, it wasn't just about the places they had visited or the battles they had fought. It was about the people they had become, the lives they had touched, and the enduring power of love and friendship. Richard and John had found their way home, and in that home they had found peace, joy, and a future filled with hope. As the story comes to a close, we reflect on the incredible journey that began with a simple act of kindness when a little girl gave up her plane seat to a veteran, only to discover he was her great-grandfather's best friend. Through unexpected reunions, heartfelt conversations, and shared memories, we witnessed the power of connection, gratitude, and the enduring bonds of friendship. What have you learned from this heartwarming tale? We invite you to share one thing you've learned and how you plan to bring it into practice in your life. Comment below and let us know. If you like this video, please leave your comment below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thank you for joining us on this journey of love, remembrance, and new beginnings.